Champagne Fork eruption, where this eruption was so large it blasted out a big portion of the mountain here, creating what geologists call a blast crater. And then just shortly thereafter, these cracks opened up from the magma chamber up into that blast crater and seeped up this magma. You can actually see one of those cracks right here, this white stripe that sort of zigzags, kind of snakes its way up the mountainside, right over there, up through all those layers of reddish-brown rock there. That's one of those cracks. They're known as volcanic dikes by geologists, and it oozed this lava up into that blast crater, this really thick, sticky lava called dacite lava. And it ended up filling that whole crater, actually over the top. You can see how it sort of spilled down on either side, and then it hardened up inside of the crater, creating this large volcanic plug. And just a couple hundred years later, when the mountain collapsed, about half of that volcanic plug fell away down into the caldera, which revealed this kind of cross-section of that blast crater that was left behind there, if that makes any sense to you guys. And this feature up here, this big gray cliff, is what we call Lau Rock, one of the most noticeable features here inside of the caldera. And it actually gets its name from a different perspective on the creation of this lake. It comes from the perspective of the Native Americans who lived in the region during the time of the eruption. Archaeologists have determined that there have been people in this area for at least 12,000 years, so they were really well established here long before this was a lake. And the people living just to the south of here in the Klamath Basin called themselves the Mukluk people, and their descendants are now known as the Klamath people just to the south of here. And they have a story about the eruption here that they still tell to this day. It's pretty fascinating because it kind of mirrors that story that modern geologists have figured out happened here. Only the cause for the eruption they didn't really attribute to the geologic forces beneath the earth, but rather kind of a titanic supernatural heartbreak. They called the mountain that once stood here Lau Yaina, which means Lau's mountain. And Lau was the spirit chief of the underworld. And he lived beneath this mountain, down below the ground amongst the smoke and fire. And every so often Lau would climb through the opening to the underworld and stand on top of his mountain. And in a thundering, and he would survey the above world. He would just sort of kind of check out the above world. And on one of those occasions, something happened to catch his eye. And that something was a someone. It was one of the Mukluk chief's daughters, Loha. She was a tall, striking young woman with long, black, glossy hair and dark, piercing eyes. And Lau fell in love with her and asked her to come and stay with him inside of his mountain where she could live forever and never know sorrow or sickness. But Loha refused Lau's offer. And none of the shamans of her tribe advised her to do anything different. So this made Lau furious. And he came storming through the opening to the underworld. And in a thundering voice, he declared to the Mukluk people that he was going to take revenge upon them through the curse of fire. And he began to rain red-hot ashes down upon their village, throwing red-hot rocks the size of the hills down towards them, and breathing avalanches of fire down the mountainside, just devouring the forest and devastating the landscape, until that fire reached the edges of the villages, and the people ran in terror, fled, and they hid in the cool waters of what we now call Klamath Lake. And they hid in those waters for quite some time, actually, to survive Lau's curse of fire somehow. And meanwhile, they were praying to Skell, their spirit chief of the above world, to come to their rescue. But Skell wasn't showing up, so a couple of the elder shamans realized that their tribe must not have been living in a way that Skell approved of, because he wasn't coming to try to save them. And something had to be done. And if somebody was going to do something, it might as well be them, because they were old and didn't have long to live anyhow. So each of them grabbed a pine torch, lit their torch, and climbed up the sides of this mountain. They threw their torches into the opening to the underworld, and then followed their torches down into that opening. And they were never seen again. But Skell, the spirit chief of the above world, saw their brave deed and their sacrifice, and took pity on their tribe. So he descended from his lodge up amongst the stars to wage war with Lau. And a fierce battle ensued. Soon all the spirits of the earth and sky were involved, until eventually Lau was defeated and pushed back down into his lodge beneath the mountain. And Skell decided that he wanted to seal him in there, so he could never again terrify the Mukluk people with his thundering voice. So he collapsed the mountain down on top of Lau's lodge to seal him down in the underworld. And in the morning, when the sun arose, the giant peak that once stood here was gone. And in the ensuing years, the spirits of the storms came and rained in torrents for many, many years, eventually lifting the curse of fire and turning this into a peaceful place that we see today. And ever since that time, the descendants of the Mukluk people have considered this an extremely sacred, spiritual place. They've only come here for spiritual rituals such as vision quests and spirit quest, where young men, young prospective shamans and chiefs and warriors would come here alone without food, and they would stay awake for many days and perform these daring feats like running down the sides of the caldera and plunging into the cold waters that they believed to be inhabited by monsters and dangerous spirits. And they would do things like grab these large boulders from down on the shoreline and carry them all the way up to the top, and then they would come back down and grab another one and carry it all the way up. They would do this over and over until they had enough rocks up there to build these big rock piles, these big rock cairns up on the ridge. And some of these actually still exist to this day. And all this was in hopes of being visited by one of the spirits that inhabit the area, who could then impart upon them new strength or power or